Hey there, Jay here. In an ongoing effort to avoid social media and keep the show as free from promotions as possible, I'm only posting on my website and sending notifications to my email list. All discounts, of which there is currently a big one up that is expiring at the end of the month, and all new offerings like upcoming live events in the UK and Ireland, new flexible teacher training offerings, a new one-to-one pain transformation program, and a new podcast discussion group coming soon are only being announced on my website and email list. So, if you haven't in a little while, head over to jbrownyoga.com and make sure you're on the always free email list. Okay? Okay. All right, whoever you are who just hit the play button, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. And I really appreciate that you did that you're choosing to put this into your ears. It's no small thing these days. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I don't know where you are or when you are listening to this, but right now when I'm recording it, it's mid-August. And it took a turn for the summer hot. It's hot up here in the attic. It's a bit of a sweat box. I don't know how long I'm going to last, but I like it. I like the feeling of the seasons. You see, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 80s, and I really don't remember seasons for the major portion of my life up until like age 18. I don't really recall there being seasons so much. It's just kind of like a general malaise somewhere between, 55, 60 to 80, and it never goes anywhere else. But when I moved to New York, I really liked that East Coast thing where you had to earn your spring by getting through the winter, and then you got to experience the fall. And then when I moved up here to Pennsylvania and saw the colors and the cycle of it each year, I've come to really enjoy feeling the hot when it's the time of year for the hot, And it's just crazy how fast time is rolling by. Longtime listeners, in a couple of days, I'm heading up for my annual trip to my in-laws in Virginia. How did it get to be the end of August already? I don't know. But the other day, I went to my eldest daughter's orientation for high school. My eldest daughter's going to high school, y'all. When did that happen? It's crazy. And, I think like I was talking about last week, I think I was saying something about fending off feelings of despair and hopelessness. Well, it certainly continues to be an ongoing struggle sometimes. But I did okay. How did you do? Did you do okay? Did you keep your wits about it? Did you succumb to all the fear? I hope your situation's okay, because I know that if it's a bad situation that you're in, sometimes you just gotta make it through somehow. However you're doing, I hope that you've got, like I said last week, some support. Maybe you got some practices that are helping you, or some people that can serve. I guess I've just been really feeling that genuine connection and friendship and authentic communication. I just value it more than anything else these days. Seems like really important, and certainly what my guest today, I think, is very much about. I'm very happy to be bringing you this conversation I recorded with Michael Hutchinson. And Michael is someone who was referred to me by a listener of this show, and I won't say too much because we talk about it and I don't want to give it away. But he has a new book coming up about breath, and he studied with students of Desikachar and with Desikachar, and we had a real, I felt, heart-to-heart connection that touches on a lot of important things that are helping me right now get through the bleakness of our world. So it was a great pleasure to connect with Michael, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. And what else? Like I said, it's hot up here. I'm sweating. So maybe we'll keep this brief. I think that there is a thing that we recorded that's going to be played at the very top of this show. But just in case to mention, if you haven't gone to my website in a very long time and you're not already on my free email list, maybe you would go do that because I've got all this new stuff coming up. We're trying to keep the show free from promotions, and I just am encouraging people to go to the website and sign up for the email list. So do that. Go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's it, y'all. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and just get to it. Let's get to this conversation I had with Michael Hutchinson. Hello?
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Are you there? Your camera's on, but I don't know if you intended it to be on or not. We don't have to have them on.
Oh, I just thought I'd had my camera on to say hello.
Okay.
So, as you were on video, I thought it was only fair.
Okay.
So, how does this work?
Where are you? I don't see you.
Oh, you don't see me?
No, I see a room with a little chakra thing.
Thank you for asking.
There you are. You had it in the other. Oh, you had the other camera. Multiple cameras
I have a
set
camera
up.
that I use for teaching. Yes.
Multiple cameras set up. I like it. Hi, Michael. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. That's great.
Yes. Well, listen, Michael, I am already recording, and if it's okay, I would like to consider us having already begun, and we're in it, and this is it. I try to keep things very informal around here. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to the show before.
In fact, I made a point of listening to Amy Weintraub this morning.
Yes.
Felt very much at heart with what she was saying about yoga and depression.
Well, we can get to that. That's interesting that you brought that up. I think for me, I would say too, I'm knocking myself a little bit because I intended to go look for the email, but a listener of this show is the reason why you're here. And I can't remember that person's name, and I'm sorry to whoever that person is who's listening right now, because they were the one who listened to my conversation with Jill Lloyd and then emailed me and said, "You got to get Michael on. He's got a new book on breath that comes from Desikachar teachings. You got to get him on." So somebody brought you here because I wasn't aware of you until that person reached out, and I want to thank that person, whoever they are.
Every copy I send out is a pebble in the pond.
Yes, indeed. Well, I also think that there's something very specific about the approach that Desikachar taught in practice, or the way that he taught asana as pranayama, and we'll talk about that today. That's something, one of the main reasons why I want to talk to you personally, given that you have this book on breath. And to me, it is like one of the primary distinguishing characteristics about what makes the practice that I learned from the Desikachar teachings from all the other approaches that I practiced. So I want to talk to you about that today. But one thing I want to talk to you about first, before we get into pranayama, I want to talk a little bit of history. And specifically, I read one thing in your bio that really piqued my mind a little bit, because we've been having a lot of conversations on the show of late that have to do a little bit about where a an Eastern wisdom perspective, like an ancient Eastern wisdom perspective, like intersects in a good way with like a modern scientific perspective?
Sure.
And then where there are times sometimes where they have to diverge almost, it seems. But I noticed in your bio, it said something that before you were into yoga, you had, and I'm going to quote this from something I read, an award-winning spell in the field of explosion mechanics. And I thought to myself, the field of explosion mechanics, is that making bombs? What's the field of explosion mechanics? Sounded like a euphemism for bomb making or something.
Well, what my role was exactly, Jay, was to determine the threat posed by munitions such as bombs, shells, and so on. And I was asked to do this one rainy February afternoon in 2007. And so I sat down with the pencil and paper. I never learned to run these computer codes. And so I worked out what it had to be, and then I went to someone who was already in the field and I asked him, does this look right, Sean? He said, oh, well, aren't you using Bhavana's equation? I said, what's that? So he wrote it up on the whiteboard, and I said, that's wrong. But they said that's what we've been using for the last 50 years. So that meant I had a new sort of, late in life career as, developing an expertise in explosion mechanics. I said, in order to quantify threats. So, for example, in the UK, bomb disposal experts have a laptop that they carry around with them. And of course, I had some input to the program that's on that laptop that tells them how far they need to evacuate.
Mm.
So, yes, that was my...
All right. Well, so that's a strange little niche to find oneself in, I imagine. I guess if you're working for health, public officials to keep people safe, like public safety or something, I guess that's different than like working for like a military contractor or something. Or did you do both of those kinds of things?
Well, I think it's inevitable in that field that you've got to have this crossover. Like in most of science, knowledge can be applied in very different ways. The same ideas. So,
yes, that's what I mean. Like, science can be in harmony with yoga or not in harmony in yoga, depending. I guess my next question would be: how do you get from the field of explosion mechanics to yoga? Instead of things blowing apart, everything's coming together into unity, huh? How does that happen?
Well, the yoga played an important part in my sort of getting there and sort of having the confidence, because as a physicist, I was something of a late developer, because after I got my degree from Cambridge, the UK economy was in somewhat of the doldrums, and I managed to get a public service job, but some of it was interesting, some of it was stressful, but I wasn't really being stretched as a physicist. I wasn't really showing what I could do. And so if we move on to the 1980s, when yoga was starting to be a very important thing in my life, it's also a time that I started to develop a confidence in my own ideas and to start to be able to push those through. So you were doing yoga while you were doing all this physics. How do you end up in a yoga class? You're a physics guy. Like, how does a physics guy end up in a yoga class? Well, how did this happen? I had taken a brief interest in yoga when I was about 15 or 16. But I got put off by the tone of there were very few books around at that time, and I got put off by what you might say the spiritual tone taken by this particular author. And which is a great shame, really, because in terms of wanting to be calm and relax, I was, I think, the forerunner of the day's overstressed, over-anxious teenager. So, my book was, that was one of the,
you got a bad book. You needed Hittleman's book. Everybody else got hit. If you had Hittleman's, you'd have been okay, maybe.
Yeah, I did get hold of Hittleman's 30-day.
Yeah, later on. That was the one most people. That was the one I was going to guess. That would have been the one.
And I thought, in 30 days, I'm going to be a meditator. It's going to change my life. And after 30 days, I got really angry with the progress that I wasn't making. So I threw the book in the trash. And before they came to collect the trash, I thought, I really should give it another month. So I pulled the book out of the trash and wiped it off. And another 30 days, and no, this isn't working. So back in the trash can.
This meditation stuff doesn't work.
And again.
See, but we'll talk about that because there's different ideas about meditation and the process of bringing it about, right?
But what I realized, Jay, was that at that time, what I really lacked was any kind of a teacher or a mentor to explain to me, say, hey, Michael, actually, you are making progress, relatively speaking. May not be the sort of progress that you might expect from reading the book, but actually, you're doing all right. Don't get het up. It's not going to take you anywhere.
You did it. You actually did the 60 days of it. That's not nothing. You did it.
Yeah, I did. I don't like to leave things unfinished.
Yeah. Well, all right. So after you realized maybe I would benefit from some instruction, where do you find some instruction? What's the first class you go to? Do you remember?
I do. It was a lady called Nancy Long who'd been teaching Keep Fit and then decided to sort of slide over a bit into yoga because that had become popular.
And that was in the 80s?
That was started in 79.
Okay. And her class, what was it like? Was it Iyengar method? What was she aligned with a particular tradition or style of practice?
No, I think I would guess now it was sort of more Satyananda than everything else.
Yeah, like a Shivananda or young Iyengar, probably.
And basically it was postures, and then you lie down and relax at the end. And it was a short class, it was lunch break, so it was half an hour of asana, and then 10 minutes lying down, that sort of thing. Lying down, listening to some tinkly music. And I've been doing this about a few years, and I started going to weekend retreats back in the early 80s. And the thing that I realized, which keys in with Amy Weintraub, is that I went on this sort of yoga and healing retreat with this lady called Dottie Hook, and she was a bit dotty. And the key realization, Jay, was that there were a lot of people there. I think everybody there was, in one sense or another, a kind of sort of emotionally walking wounded, that expression. Not only that, but the realization that I was one, and that I had a long way to go in terms of sorting out stuff, and that was really why I wasn't making progress with meditation. There was so much that needed sorting internally, and that was a work of 20, 25 years.
It's so interesting to hear you say that. I was recently considering meditation with some some folks who were into training with me, and I was saying something similar, that strangely enough, like in order to experience some of these deeper layers of absorption, like forcing yourself to sit is not always really going to make that happen. That sometimes it had a lot, in my experience, to do with what you just said, that there was like life that needed to get sorted and things that needed to get sorted in me, and all this work that I consider part of my meditation work, like my practice to be able to experience those things more, because it's in the way, like that stands in the way of those experiences, it seems like.
Well, I still very much need the pranayama to sort out my state of mind.
Well, was Dottie doing breath work in the asana? Probably not, just poses, you said, right?
It's so long ago. I mean, the only thing that I remember from that first weekend is that, I have an unfortunate tendency to volunteer for things. And so Dottie and her helper, they had me laid down in a darkened room, and one was massaging my feet and the other was massaging my head. And I can't remember what happened, but I went into this trance. I went into this trance state where I flew on the back of an eagle. So
the physics guy's having visions of flying on the eagle, eh? I love it. That's awesome. But you had a very clear, like, image. You saw it. It was like,
it was more real than a dream, I would say.
And so was that like, okay, that's when it's so interesting to me, because like however rewarding your career in physics was, it wasn't something that was helping you like address yourself and how you relate in the world and stuff. And yoga, I think that's it. Very much what seems to me yoga is a vehicle for.
Absolutely, Jay. And it was, but it wasn't really until, again, seems, well, I don't know if there's some power looking over me and making things happen at the right time.
No, we could talk about that. Put a pin in that one.
But, in 1983, I'd been going to this lunchtime class then for 4 years. And so Nancy said to me, I want to back in teaching this class. My husband's retiring. We want to spend time together. No, don't want to be tied down. And so, will you take over the class? So I said, well, Nancy, I don't know. And so there was another teacher I'd been going to, Peter Gillam, and he trained with the British Wheel of Yoga. So I went to speak to him. He said, well, you don't really know. He said that I didn't really need to train. Well, I didn't feel confident to take the responsibility of teaching people without any training. So I managed to find a course. And so I had to go every Wednesday night during term time. So that's how it was arranged. To Salisbury, which is a city about 30 miles from here. And there I met a lady called Margaret Waldman, who was our tutor. And her teacher was Martin Underwood, who was one of Mr. Desikachar students at the time. And so through Margaret, I met Paul Harvey, who at that time, he was becoming Desikachar's representative in the UK, effectively. And so after I finished my training with the British Wheel, I went on to do a further 4 years part-time training with Paul. And the whole thing was a very sort of up and down and rocky experience.
How so?
Well, Paul Harvey is great. I just wonder, I mean, Paul Harvey, in his own way, in his own very individual way, is great, but he is not the easiest person to train under.
Interesting. I mean, I've said this many times on the show. I've reached out and I wanted to bring him on the show, and he hasn't accepted the invitation yet. But it's interesting that you say that in that he was strict.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he once bawled me out for being 2 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we had our ups and downs, we had our misunderstandings, but I got through the course. And I was also having... I
mean, he's brilliantly smart. Let's just say that.
Oh, well yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he holds him and just a few others. He's one of the few people on the planet who have that much direct study with Desikachar and know that much, who's still with us, so yeah. I
mean, he would say to me, one-to-one, Michael, I don't know much about that, but then if I sort of really persisted with something, then he'd take down this great big lever arch file, and it was
he's got references. Yeah.
There's all when he sort of
but what I'm curious is about the differences in what you learn from the courses at the British Wheel in terms of what you teach about yoga and practice and how you do poses and stuff. Was there some differences there?
Not a great deal, because at that time British Wheel had their way of assessing people is that you wrote 19 essays. So I had to write these and get them typed up and sent off. But as for how the courses are run, the tutors had a great deal of latitude at the time. And so Margaret taught us as if within the Wheel syllabus, she taught us basically Mr. Desikachar's yoga.
Oh, okay. So you got that from your other training too. Because that is distinguished, as I said before, in my experience, having had lots of different approaches or training in different approaches, it's very different. So you can tell the difference when you're practicing with someone who's kind of aligned with those basic principles of practice compared to other traditions.
Well, it always, I realized, Jay, that very early on that Mr. Desikachar's approach was very consistent. Everything fitted together. There was always a reason and a purpose for everything. And the whole thing is, time and again we're told, function is more important than form. Purpose and direction.
I think we're singing the same song here, Michael. Because I found, having, like I said, explored other traditions, to me, the Desikachar teachings were where the questions that I had were answered best. Where truly I developed what I would call a personal practice, like my own practice. And I think that is another distinguishing thing in terms of it being rooted in the idea of a one-to-one instruction and someone developing a personal practice for themselves that they do on their own without having to go to class necessarily. Not to say that group classes are bad, but even if you bring those principles to a group class, it's different than certain approaches where it's not so much about that. It's about you coming and kind of getting taken on a journey with the teacher or something. But Desikachar teachings seem to me very much about someone coming to know themselves and having a personal practice to serve that,
But that's also something that appealed to me, because the idea the direction is always towards greater independence for the student, which appeals to me as a teacher because my attitude to work or any responsibility is to try to work myself out of a job.
Isn't that the thing? When we're good at it, they don't need you anymore, right? It's such an irony, and interesting in terms of making money and stuff. But I guess I'm curious then. So you spent this time also training with Paul. You said it had its ups and downs. I know at some point you studied at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. When do you start making trips there?
That first trip was in 1999. So it was a trip led by Paul, a group of us, I think about 20 of us. And so 2 weeks study, therapeutic application of yoga.
Mm-hmm. I see. And that was at the Mandiram. And did they at that time when you went there in 1999, were they distinguishing between therapeutic applications of yoga and yoga therapy?
No, I don't think so.
Because, that's sort of something we could potentially talk about. Like, whatever. Not that I want to get into a conversation. In the past, I've had these kind of, I don't know how useful conversations about how you distinguish between yoga and yoga therapy. But I am kind of curious about, like, at that time in 1999, did the Mandiram have like yoga therapy training programs, or was it just a specific program that was put together to look at the therapeutic applications?
Well, the training that I did with Paul was intended to take me to a point where, yes, I could see people one-to-one, and I could identify a direction for someone to take him or her forward in the direction that was indicated by their needs and aspirations. So the training that I had with Paul was really to teach people one-to-one for, with therapeutic intentions in mind. With every person that comes is a different mixture of needs and aims and aspirations. And so someone could come to me, for advice on how to approach the various asana. But then, in fifth or sixth lesson, something more internal might come out. Mm-hmm. And then someone who came to me for, say, a back problem, for example, might start to develop a further interest in perhaps, the more psychological sides of yoga. So whoever comes is always different. And as I work with people, their needs and aspirations can change. Some people, they just come for half a dozen lessons, job done, thank you. We just don't know.
Yeah, no. And I guess my question is that process, like you just said something there, and I didn't think we were going to go here, and I want to get to Desikachar, but we're here, so I'll ask about it. Because you talked about like helping facilitate a direction for someone in practice, which I think is also a Desikachar. Even I've had people on the show debating the meaning of Nirodha, like whether it's to direct or whether it's to still or stop, to cease. So you using the word about finding direction, I've always associated like Desikachar's teaching about yoga having a lot to do with that, like having direction and going in that direction with consistency. So when you talk about that being the work of helping someone or teaching someone yoga, I guess my curiosity there is how much of that. And I guess it depends, like certainly the teacher gives like suggestions and directives for a student to used to have experience, right? But the direction, isn't it coming from the student? Like, I guess there's always been a question for me, like how much prescription and how much process is involved, like how much of the teacher knowing what sequence to give to the student is what does it. Or oftentimes, as I understand it, Desikachar, you're often using the same simple practices for lots of people. It's not like everybody gets some totally unique sequence of asana, that what individualizes it is something more subtle.
Well, to be honest, a lot of the way that I teach is intuition. So, yes, a student presents to me, and now I'm thinking I've got a particular one that I'm helping at the moment. And, I spent half an hour with him, listening to all about the sort of problems that he has and thinking about, and then just let something come to me about, well, taking this in the round, what are the sort of 3 first things he can be doing that will will set him on the path to ameliorating these problems? And so I just, and it happened, I said, well, try this. This is what Mr. Desikachar called 2-foot support. I don't know if you know that pose, but it's very simple. But those of us who are accomplished, it's a relatively easy one. But for him, I seem to have hit it right in that it was something that was possible for him, but also a challenge. So I could see that if we worked with this, it would go in the direction of, say, of gradually opening up what was particularly tight about his posture and the way that he was sitting when he was talking to me, and how that might have connected with his breathing. Mm.
I guess, but that's very specific to like the moment and the interpersonal interaction that you're having with them and the communication that's happening and the relationship. I guess that's different than when someone has like an injury and they're coming to a yoga therapist to try to address their injury. Like people go to the mandiram with health conditions to have them address those health conditions. I guess that maybe a distinction between do you make a distinction between like yoga and yoga therapy, or is it just the same process in a different context or something?
The yoga therapy requires the teacher or someone who presents his or herself as a yoga therapist needs to be able to have this kind of insight given the student in front of me. I have listening to that student, observing that student, asking that student to make different moves, for example, to assess where there might be restrictions. Everything that the student presents with as a problem is in one sense or another a restriction, the lack of freedom. And so working as a yoga teacher, you can teach people what you know. You can, if someone asks you how to do this asana or how to do this pranayama, you can teach them. But you're not qualified to say, you're qualified to say what that person could do. You're not qualified to say what that person should do. Do you see the difference?
I do, but that assumes that one person knows what other people should do and shouldn't do. And I guess that's my question about prescription and process. Certainly, no, don't get me wrong. Certainly somebody who has more learning and is more informed about practice and how bodies work and how practice can be utilized to help people will be more effective at being able to know how to determine what it should, although I try to stay away from shoulds. Because even in that example that you gave, just because that one simple practice that you gave to this student that you were working with helped him in that situation, doesn't mean that someone else who was in a same situation would be helped by the same exact thing. That it's not, you said it was an intuitive process more than like some kind of set protocol. So how do you determine whether someone has that insight or not to know those things? Because a yoga teacher, I know many yoga teachers who don't have yoga therapy degrees, but have been yoga teachers for a long time, who are doing all the same things that you described.
Well, that really depends, because if, let's say someone presents for training as a yoga therapist, how do I, as a tutor, know or sense somehow that this person is going to, through training and experience, going to develop this potential to see what could be right for a particular person in a particular circumstance? Because that comes not only with training, it does not only with knowledge, not only with logic, but with some kind of, we use the word intuition to describe some kind of integrative faculty where, over a period, as I described, of talking to somebody, observing somebody, something comes to mind. You don't, at the outset, as a therapist, you don't know what that is. Because, I know you were saying you don't like coulds and shoulds.
Coulds, I'm okay with coulds more than shoulds, but
well, this really does come from Mr. Desikachar. Maybe I'm not using the right words, but I'm pretty sure this is what Paul said in the way he trained us, is that, teaching one-to-one, the therapeutic application, you're not thinking of all the things that student could do. You're identifying the things that will be productive and meaningful and move that student in a particular direction. And so that's the meaning of should in this context. Is what will serve a purpose, what will perform a function for that student, because yoga is vast. And how on earth can you take all the vastness of yoga, which you've accumulated over decades of training and practice and teaching and goodness knows, and then you're there in that half an hour with that student, and you come to a conclusion through some integrated process which we call intuition, and say, this is what you need to be doing for every day for the next few weeks, and then report back to me. Is it working? Is there progress?
Well, it's interesting to me because I wrote something that you wrote about when you trained as a yoga therapist. The understanding was entirely experiential. And then over time, that has also been coupled with lots of other learning, And I guess sometimes I feel like when it's just the kind of scientific learning rather than the experiential learning, it starts to feel like something else. But I guess I'm curious actually now to get to Desikachar, because I know you did get to spend some time with him. And I'm always curious about whatever time you got to spend with him. Like, when did you get to meet him? Did you get to have any classes with him?
Well, the first time I did meet him very briefly in 1986, just before I started this 4-year training with Paul. And he was on a podium next to his uncle, Mr. Iyengar. And I was just struck by the differences between the two men. I don't know if you ever, everybody now you can see people on video these days, but no, Mr. Iyengar, I was very much struck by his presence, his charisma.
They would say he had a barrel chest and he stood like a lion or whatever. I've heard people describe him.
Yes. The last time I saw him was at the opening of Mr. Desikachar's rebuilt Mandiram, and he was the guest of honor. Mm. He came in with his little retinue, and so my first impression was 91 and still breathing fire. Whereas compared to his uncle, Mr. Desikachar, was impressed by his quietness, his serenity, his humility, and the quiet and very clear way that he spoke. Mm. And then I didn't see him. I saw him very briefly. When I was in Madras for a few days in '89. I went to one of his evening lectures, and then afterwards I introduced myself and said to him, "No, you don't know me, but I'm Paul Harvey's student. I'm not a very serious student, sir." And which is a lie.
Yeah, it seems to me pretty serious up until that point.
And he said to me, "Oh, we're not serious here. We're just having some fun."
So all this time you're still working in physics, or do you let go of that at some point?
In 2004, I went to my divisional head where I was working and said, "No, I really want to start doing some teacher training in training people to teach yoga. I can't do this while I'm working full time. Please think about it, because otherwise I will just have to put some money aside, and when I can, I just have to walk out the gate and you won't see me anymore." So anyway, so the outcome of that is it came back a week or so later, he thought about it, and sort of okay, you can work 3 days a week. But I reckon they got 4 days out of me.
Yeah. So you wore both hats for many years.
So I did for 10 years. I wore both hats, running training courses. Now on the other side of the mat in British Wheel of Yoga, I was now the tutor rather than the student. Mm-hmm. And then in 2014, at the same time, I retired both from physics and from running teacher training courses. Mm. I finished both in the same week.
I see. And
then I've been cut loose.
What can I ask? What was behind that? Or as much as you want to share, you don't have to. But I get a sense that it was a inflection moment for you in your life.
Yeah, it is. In a certain way, it's just how it happened. The dates happened to coincide. Like, so many things just seem to happen. The physics didn't stop. I carried on helping to organise a conference in Oxford that year, and I still carried on doing a little bit of work part-time. I had a visiting position at Imperial College and used to go up there, talk to people. And then, 3 years later, I was still thinking that I was carrying on with a little bit of physics, and obviously teaching yoga, seeing students, offering, teaching weekend retreats, day seminars, and other teaching commitments. And so this is all going on. And then my wife and I were at the opera in London, and I started to feel unwell. I thought, oh dear, I'm coming down with flu. I just hope I can make it home okay. And then a couple of days later, I broke out in a rash. So I went to the local hospital, and they said, you've got chicken pox. And then, then sort of found myself in an isolation room on a drip. Mm. And it took me 6 months to get over that.
Wow.
To sort of really sort of knocked me back for, quite some time. And so that again, that was exactly 3 years after I retired to the day. Mm. And,
So
since
you got better at some point, right? And when you emerged, do you start teaching again? Are you utilizing practice to help you in your recovery?
Well, that's it. I'm keeping up my practice every day as best I can. It's funny, when I was there in the hotel room, I had the Katha Upanishad with me. So I thought, well, if I'm going to leave this life, I'm going to leave on the right note.
Might as well fill my brain with some good stuff, right? Yeah.
So I think it was when I'd recovered from that it started to form in my head this idea of, because the thing I've been able to keep up was my pranayama practice. And the thing is that I remember I had a phone call from one of the doctors at the local general practice, and he was just to check up on me, and he said, Mr. Hutchinson, have you been feeling depressed at all? I don't know that he'd picked up something in my tone of voice. And I said, well, yes, doctor, I've been feeling very down. He said, oh, don't worry about that. It's just a symptom of the chicken pox.
Like it's a known symptom.
No, chicken pox, its whole thing is neurological. It's in the nervous system. I think, yeah, that's doctor, you're right. So,
if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.